The third of our series of qualitative method podcasts will be about documentary analysis and ethnographic studies. So we'll start with documentary analysis, and this is something that we do throughout at our times here at Manchester and in planning and environment and real estate, that we actually use documents, be they planning policies, planning guidance, documents coming out of developers or consultants, different forms of material from local authorities, to try and structure our understanding of why development is occurring in a specific way in a particular location. And there are lots of different things to think about here. I mean, firstly, what types of documents do you want to use and how do you want to use them? So are they more technical summaries such as EIA reports or investment strategies? Are they government reports about a particular theme, be it air pollution, climate change? Are they the National Planning Policy Framework or local development plans? So we have to look at the breadth of material that we can choose to work with and how that might inform what we're doing. And again, this might reflect on the different stakeholder groups that we're talking to, be it planners or decision makers, developers, local communities, the environment sector, and so on. And within this, we need to think quite carefully about what we're looking for, what we're looking at. So are we trying to identify key themes or key ideas that are penetrating or permeating through some of these policies? Are we looking at the use of particular phrases or particular terminology, be it green infrastructure, environmental impact, real estate assets? Or are we talking about references to different events, people, policies or actions? So this is probably the really important bit for documentary analysis, and the way in which we identify the categories or the themes or the terms that we're going to use to actually start to go through the documents. And this means that we have to do quite a lot of preparation work to maybe look through the literature to see what sort of policy analysis or policy discourses that they're promoting, and then how this reflects on the research questions that you might have for your particular study. So that literature review and your focus will potentially give you the key themes or the key phrases to work with, and then you can go through the documentation to try and find out what you're looking for. And this leads on to the questions about how we record information for policy analysis. So is it about the number of references to topic X? So is it a simple tally chart? Or is it about something that's more fluid and more contextual? So are you looking at the use of a certain term or a certain phrase within the context in the document itself? So will you be looking at the way in which it's positioned in a paragraph or in a section? And if so, how might you then look at what comes before and what comes after as part of that contextual analysis? Or are you looking at a more structured and more coded form of discourse analysis, where you're trying to find the subtle inferred or implied meanings within a statement? And if you are interested in discourse analysis, then we can guide you in certain reading, but those of you doing the urban theory sort of module, discourse analysis will be something that hopefully you'll pick up on in there. But the way in which we identify the key themes and ideas, the way in which we record them is really important, because it will either give you numerical data to say, well, a certain phrase was used this amount of times in this document. So for my PhD, I looked at how often GI was used in regional policy. But then there was an additional process of contextual analysis, looking at what the data actually said, what the terms were used in a certain context, and how they were presenting it. And the analysis there took the form of a more reflective understanding of some of the key principles or ideas that came out of the literature, and were then used to see how that was being applied in this particular context. We also have to think about what you're going to do with this data and how you might report it in your dissertation. So is it simply going to be descriptive? Will it just be a table of the number of times a certain theme was discussed? So you need to think about what added value a documentary or policy analysis will provide you with. In many ways, they're really useful to provide additional context for a case study, or for how you might actually situate a discussion in a certain area, because it sets out a very guided and a very structured way in which a local authority or government is saying they're going to direct investment or management. So that might be a nice counterbalance to what you see on the ground. You might see that the policy talks about urban regeneration or the use of different forms of economic development and how they might do it, but then when you're talking to participants at the local level, it might be very different. So you have to think about whether it's going to be truly descriptive or whether it would be something that's more analytical and more nuanced. And if you can do that, then normally the documentary analysis can be really quite useful. And you also need to think about the availability of documents and the sensitivity of the material. So is all the material going to be available online? Will it all be available in the public arenas? So some stuff from developers or private companies, for instance, such as their financial statistics, might not be available in the same way that they would be for a local planning authority. So in terms of documentary analysis, there are some key ideas to think about. And these are just, again, a couple of pros and cons. So in terms of the pros, there's a replication and a continuity of the research that you can actually say, well, this is how it's been done for this one, this is how these ideas are being presented in a number of different documents. These documents are also records. They have normally either been approved or adopted or put into the public domain. So they present a situated understanding of a key idea, so that they can give you a baseline of what an organisation was thinking about at a certain point in time. And that might be, again, a local authority, it might be an environmental charity or environmental organisation, or it might be a business. Documentary analysis can be used to generate thematic and specific factual evidence that supports other forms of data collection and analysis, so it can be used to help you with triangulation. So again, if you're using key themes to structure an interview or a questionnaire, then you might use the same key themes to look at policy or look at documents to see how they actually interact, or whether they're representative of each other. And one of the key lines here is that particularly policy and guidance documents coming out of government, they represent a more formal narrative. So they actually represent something which has gone through a level of scrutiny and peer review internally in that organisation to be presented as a formal output from that institution. So a local plan, for instance, or supplementary planning guidance, or the National Planning Policy Framework even, will set out the evidence and the arguments that are structured around this is how that organisation does things. And again, that can be compared to other organisations as well. And documentary analysis, it kind of provides you with an opportunity to think more broadly about what documents might actually be involved or might actually be important. So are they just going to be from local planning authorities, or will they be more diverse? And can you source them from across the different stakeholder groups that you're looking for? So the positives here are that it gives you a baseline of information that can be both the formal narrative, but also that sort of more subtle or nuanced understanding from different organisations. But there are, again, cons to this as well. So are the documents available? Are the documents too historic now? And can you analyse them against current approaches or current trends? So things like climate change or health data might be very different now to what they were in the 1990s or 1980s when they were written. You also need to think about the power and the authority embedded within these documents. So are they presenting a very, very directed form of discussion from a government? You might think about Brexit in this way, in the way the current government is doing that. Or are they more nuanced? Are they more impartial? And most documents will have a direction in terms of how they present information. So you have to think carefully about the power and the voice associated with them. You also need to think about which documents you might actually look at, and whether or not by not looking at everything, you're minimising some of the validity in terms of the breadth of information that you're including. So if you are going to exclude some documents, you need to be able to rationalise why, and therefore to say, oh, this is good and this is bad for a certain reason. And it can be quite difficult to attribute cause and effect from documentary analysis, so you can't really say that this policy has directly influenced this action, although you might be able to sort of suggest that there are links between them. So you will need other corroborating evidence, so that triangulation method of either interviews or questionnaires as well. So documentary analysis, policy analysis is something that we've done over the last 3 years in PEM. with you, and it's something which you can do relatively simply if you can get the parameters of the analysis and the searches right, and if you take into account these issues that might be problems there. But we also can think about the use of things that are a little bit, I would say they're fluffier, or less structured in the way that we would see from some more empirical views, so observational and ethnographic methods. And these are the sort of ways where you might be simply observing people, you might be using that more very qualitative sense of data collection. So it might be simply you watch people doing things, or you're writing a diary about how people interact with a space. And this can be incredibly difficult to do because it's very different to what we do normally, and also it can be very difficult to report on because you're basically writing a narrative that's commenting on what you see in front of you. And whilst we can do it in terms of doing quick site analyses, so what's there, what's good, what's bad, we can't often, or we don't often see how we take this further and look at the sort of the subtleties of how people are using it. There are some issues here about how you go about doing it, particularly with more ethnographic methods, about you being the observer and therefore changing the phenomena that you're looking at, and then how you interpret that area. So there's a lot of subjectivity here and a lot of issues where people might be responding to you as the person in the room rather than responding to the environment per se. But if you are just there and people don't notice you, you can watch how people interact with spaces in quite a free manner. A couple of really important issues here if you are thinking about doing ethnographic methods or observations is the issues about ethical consent and the way in which you do it. So you need to be careful about invasion of privacy and biases in terms of what you're looking at and how you're looking at it and where you are. You need to be aware that some people might find it odd or creepy that you're sat there making notes and watching people. So for instance, I would advise strongly against looking at people in playgrounds in terms of looking at play or social interaction, because you might end up with parents shouting at you. But you need to think carefully with ethnography about the way in which it might happen, the way in which you might go through it, and the value of that data, because it will be inherently qualitative and very descriptive. So how will you use that data to supplement or to promote your ideas? And again, if you are interested in this, there's lots of material in the geography and anthropology literature about ethnography. In terms of observation, we tend to do this all the time. So if we are going to do site analyses, we might go and simply look at what's there and how things are interacting, and what activities people might be doing in a particular location, how they access it, how they move across it. That's not ethnography, that's simple observational methods. But this is something which is both quite technical and very subjective, so it is something to think carefully about. Okay, that's the end of this particular podcast. We'll see you again soon.